Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. I know we still have a couple minutes before we kick things off here, but while we're waiting, there are some pre-webinar polling questions for you to answer so that we can better assess your knowledge on dairy prior to the beginning of this webinar. So please take a few moments and fill out the 3 pre-webinar polls that just appeared on your screen. And we'll give folks another minute to join in, and we'll get started right at 4 o'clock. All right, we'll give it just another 30 seconds or so and get started. All right, we will get things started. I want to be sensitive of everyone's time. We'll get started right at 4 o'clock on the dot. Welcome to today's webinar titled Feed the Need, Hunger in the Locker Room. Thanks for joining us today to learn more about this very important topic, as many students in general, have returned to school, whether virtual, in-person, or hybrid, and many have also returned to sports. My name is Liz Jelkowitz, and I'm a registered dietitian with the American Dairy Association Northeast, and I also help to lead up our sports nutrition advisory panel here at ADAIN. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit organization that represents over 10,000 dairy farm families in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Northern Virginia, and DC. Through our Refuel with Chocolate Milk program, we collaborate with a variety of partners in both the private and public sector, including our high school athletic associations within our territory. American Dairy's Refuel with Chocolate Milk program helps to sponsor high school athletics within our region, which helps provide funding for championship events and nutrition education for both coaches and student athletes. On this slide too, I just also want to mention that at the end of this webinar, we will be selecting 3 lucky attendees at random to win a Refuel with Chocolate Milk portable cooler and $300 to stock it with chocolate milk. But you must stay on for the entire presentation to be eligible, for this prize. So good luck. Here you'll see our 2020 Sports Nutrition Advisory Panel here at ADAIN, which I help to manage. One of the main jobs of these panelists is to create relevant and timely content for our high school coaches and student athletes throughout the year. You'll also notice on that slide in the middle column the middle row all the way on the right is one of our panelists and speakers today, Leslie Bonci. Next slide. I also wanted to take a quick moment and share our website with you all, americandairy.com. Here you can access tons of free downloadable resources ranging from general dairy nutrition on milk, yogurt, and cheese to sports nutrition and so much more. These are great resources that you can share with parents and student athletes. And then lastly, here are our social media handles. So if you don't already follow us, please do. And feel free to like and share our content, as much of it does pertain to your student athletes. And now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce to you our 2 speakers today, Roberta Anding and Leslie Bonci, 2 very well-regarded and respected sports nutrition experts in the field. Roberta Anding is the clinical and sports dietitian for the Baylor College of Medicine Corporate Programs team. She's an assistant professor in the Baylor College of Medicine Department of Orthopedic Surgery. She's also a member she's also a faculty member at Rice University, where she serves as the sports dietitian for the Rice Owls. She's the former sports dietitian for the 2017 World Champion Houston Astros, Houston Texans NFL franchise, and the Houston Ballet. Roberta has been honored with the Sports, Cardiovascular, and Wellness Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group Achievement Award in 2011, and she received the Texas Distinguished Dietitian Award in 2008 and the Texas Dietetic Association Media Award in 2006. For the past 9 years, Roberta was an Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics media spokesperson for Houston and still remains active in both the Houston and national media outlets. Next, I'd like to introduce Leslie. Leslie Bonci is the owner of Active Eating Advice, Be Fit, Fed, Fearless, a nutrition consulting company, and is the co-founder of Performance 365, a sports nutrition consulting company, along with Roberta. Performance 365 provided sports nutrition services for the XFL in 2020. Leslie is the sports dietitian for the 2020 Super Bowl champions Kansas City Chiefs. She's also the author of Sports Nutrition for Coaches and the American Dietetic Association Guide to Better Digestion, and as well as co-author of, and these are some of my favorite titles, by the way, Leslie, Run Your Butt Off, Walk Your Butt Off, The Active Calorie Diet, and Bike Your Butt Off. She has authored chapters for sports medicine and sports nutrition manuals. Leslie is also a blogger for U.S. News and World Report, Eat and Run, and appears regularly on local television as well as local and national radio programs. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for being here today. Roberta, you can go ahead and take it away. And we actually are going to be starting the presentation with a poll on the next slide.
Yes, and both Leslie and I are really excited to be here today, and we're going to test your knowledge and give you some practical tips along the way. So take a few seconds, if you wouldn't mind, and answer our presentation poll. Okay, so it looks like many of you have not had the conversation about food insecurity, and hopefully as we go through this, we'll point out some information for you that will help you to have those conversations. So when we look at the rates of food insecurity at June of this year, you could see that the states that are in gray were near the US average, and the US average was 9.7%. But as you can imagine with the pandemic, you're going to see these rates are going to change. So you can see in your part of the world, you can see certain states are going to be below the national average, Delaware being one, but we're now seeing the creep up of these as the pandemic has gone on. So next slide. The current state of food insecurity, when we look back to 2018, 11% of people in the US were food insecure and lacked consistent access to nutritious food options, which is 37 million food insecure people. But when you look at what happened with the pandemic, with COVID-19, 38% of households report moderate to high levels of food insecurity, and 20% of children are experiencing food insecurity. So I now make the assumption, based on these numbers, that the families that I'm dealing with are going to have some degree of food insecurity. So I might ask the question or phrase it this way. I'm assuming you would love to save money on food because I love to save money on food. So I am going to give you the least expensive options, and then we can go up from there. So I make the assumption, rather than saying to a family, how much money do you make? Or can you feed your family? Those are often embarrassing questions, but if we just start with the basics, I'm assuming everybody likes to save money, and so here are my suggestions. So next slide. So when we look at best case scenarios, that's scenario A. When we look at COVID-19 impact on food insecurity, scenario A is, maybe 1 in 7. But as we go across this from gray to blue to red, you can see that the projected number of food insecure children goes from 12.4 million up to 18 million. And so we can see as the pandemic goes on and economic shortfalls and businesses staying closed, you can imagine that worst case scenario could be scenario C. And as we go into the second wave of the pandemic and more potential shutdowns, I think it's very possible that we could see scenario C upon us. So again, this is not, I don't have any children in my food that are in my school that are food insecure. It's how do I identify them? How do I make them comfortable with that conversation? And I think both Leslie and I would have the same thoughts on this. Coaches, in my mind, are the heroes. You're interfacing with student athletes every single day. They trust you. They rely on your guidance in so many ways, and so would also rely on your guidance and expertise when it comes to what am I going to do about this? How am I going to feed my family? Next slide. So what are our definitions? Well, high food security means your family doesn't have any indication of food access problems. It's not only the amount of food, but the quality of food. There's no problem within that household. Marginal food security is one or two reported indications typical of anxiety over food sufficiency or shortage. And so athletes will come in and say, yeah, we've had more pancake suppers. And you say, well, what's in your pancake supper? Well, it's pancakes and syrup. And you're not hearing milk, or you're not hearing yogurt, or you're not hearing eggs. And so what you're really hearing is only a high carbohydrate meal. Your student athlete may not know that that's marginal, but you can certainly identify it as such. So next slide. Low food security now really is reduced quality, variety, or desirability of the diet. Calories could still be there. And I think it's important to note here that when we talk about food insecurity, we're not always talking about athletes who are underweight. This can certainly happen in overweight athletes. They're just getting high carbohydrate, high fat meals without a quality source of protein. Very low food security reports of multiple indication of disrupted eating patterns, reduced food intake. Parents will oftentimes describe that they're skipping dinner to make sure that their children have food on the table, and they would fall into this category of low food security. I do want to also talk just briefly about the collegiate athlete. We assume that everybody's on a full scholarship, and that is not the case. So you can certainly see lots of college athletes and college students become food insecure as well. Okay. So how and why? Well, certainly it can be a loss of a job. It could be one of the two parents or working adults in the household. Working hours are being cut back, being furloughed, medical expenses, inability to access affordable childcare or housing, natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, COVID-19, the death of a family member, and again, that college student. So the face of hunger is constantly changing in the United States. Next slide. So when we look at the impact of food security status is often a stronger predictor of the top chronic conditions than income. So when we look at the top chronic illnesses of Americans, things like obesity and asthma, high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney disease, hypertension, and diabetes, access to quality food, that food security, is a major driver of who's going to get a chronic condition. So it's not always, I just didn't make a good choice. The choice was made for me based on food insecurity. We certainly know that mental distress and anxiety, suicidal ideation have all been associated with food insecurity. So we're looking here at both sides of the coin. We're not only looking at physical consequences, we're also looking at psychological consequences as well. So next slide. Food deserts and swamps. A desert just means you have limited access, maybe smaller selection of foods at higher prices, but we also have food swamps, which are really defined as an overabundance of fast food restaurants in your neighborhood versus quality grocery stores. So next slide. Harsh reality, 1 in 7 children in the United States live with food insecurity. In the pandemic, that can go up to 25%, and 1 out of 8 households do not have enough to eat. And this is not equal opportunity. So if you look at this graph and we look at the impact on people of color is substantially greater than if you're Caucasian. So certainly when we look at the number of food insecure households, it's led by Caucasian families just because of the high percentage of the United States that is white. But when you look at the percentages, certainly Black and Hispanic families are disproportionately affected. And so there really needs to be, I'm going to say, not only outreach to all families, but an appreciation that food insecurity is going to affect families of color more than not. So next slide, please. Yep. So what are our barriers? Well, income level and employment, physical access, food deserts and swamps. Do you have a working car? Can you get to the grocery store? Is somebody in the house disabled or have mobility status issues that prevents them from cooking and shopping? Who's at risk? Certainly households with children, single parents household. If you're below the poverty line, and minority households are all at risk of being food insecure. So next slide. Hunger, how to define it? Well, it's just like the face of hunger is changing, so is the definition. Do you have enough? Is it quality? Is it accessibility? Is there an impact on cognitive, physical performance and health? All of those are going to be intertwined with your hungry athlete. So there we go. So can students and family meet their dietary guidelines for Americans? And what those are nutritional guidance for Americans over the age of 2, updated every 5 years. We've addressed the barriers. Sometimes it is a knowledge deficit that, oh, I believe that I shouldn't eat or drink milk because I'm over the age of 2. So it could be a knowledge deficit. It could also be a lack of cooking skills, lack of shopping skills, what's on sale versus what is actually a good price, certainly lack of time, and oftentimes underappreciated in the student athlete is the high calorie needs that they have to fuel growth and development. And the National School Lunch Program provides between 750 and 850 calories for lunch. But if that is your only meal, that's certainly going to make you not only hungry, but falls into that definition of food insecurity. So next slide. And so calorie and protein needs for adolescent athletes, and this is for moderate activity. And so to me, what that means is one after school practice a day, 1 to 3 hours. But if you're doing 2 a days to try and get your team back up, this is not going to be enough for that. So if you look at the slide, the top portion of this is males. And so when you look at males 15 to 18, their calorie needs sit at about 3,000 calories a day. That's assuming they don't need to gain weight. They need to gain weight, that could be 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day. Girls are a little bit different when you look at the bottom of that graph. Consistently, they need about 2,200 calories a day for moderate activity. Certainly, protein needs go up with growth and development as well, as illustrated by this slide. So next slide, please. And in a land of plenty, despite us having access to a lot of food, oftentimes the quality isn't there. And so when we look at this list of nutrient deficiencies in adolescents, it's actually pretty substantial. When we look at riboflavin, thiamine, vitamin B12, D, calcium, magnesium, many of these are going to be met by milk and dairy products as well. So in a land of plenty, many of our young adults need more of these essential nutrients. And yes, they are called essential for a reason. Next slide, please. The consequences of food insecurity, you might see this on the field and in the classroom. Poor ability to concentrate, can't run the right play. Teachers report them falling asleep in class. Irritability could be fighting at practice, fighting in the weight room. Lack of focus, poor recall of information. Difficulty in school, particularly things like higher math level. Science courses are oftentimes the most difficult. And oftentimes the driving factor here is low blood sugar. So when your blood sugar is low, you can have all of those signs and symptoms, but then when food becomes available or there's snacks that are put out, oftentimes the choices are going to be carbohydrate foods, either salty or sweet, because your blood sugar is going to go up quickly. So when we look at choices that teens make, when that food becomes available, it's generally not nutrient dense foods. So we have to be cognizant of the kinds of snacks and things that are available, what kinds of food that the parent association might be bringing in or recommending. So next slide. So now as we talk about the health consequences and coping strategies, I am going to turn this over to my partner in crime, Leslie Bonci.
Well, thank you, Roberta, for that, for setting the stage of something that is so critically important. And before I start, let me remind anybody that if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and we will be sure to answer them as we go through this. Or actually we type them into Q&A. Okay, so just reiterating a little bit of what Roberta has already said, and then moving on from there, is when we think about these health consequences and the coping strategies, it impacts what happens in the classroom. It also impacts what happens on the field of play, and it certainly impacts one's ability to grow well and be well. So not only are we talking about poor health and increased mental health concerns, but perhaps it's a need to borrow money. In some cases, it might be for a working teen not being able to pay his or her bills because they just don't have the money. They're trying to juggle all of this around. What about kids that are already on medication? If there's not enough money to go around, that can be problematic. Body mass index can go up, and part of that due to the quality of what is being consumed, and in some cases quantity as well. Taking food from dumpsters because somebody is hungry and trying to feed their body in any way, shape, or form. And certainly there have been reports of student athletes who have sold their blood, plasma, sperm, or eggs in order to make ends meet. So next slide, please. So what do we do with this information, and how indeed can you be the athlete's advocate? And let me echo what Roberta said. I adore the coaches that I work with. You are on the front lines each and every day. You have that opportunity to garner the trust of the athletes. As a sports dietitian, we're in the periphery, but you are literally there, boots to the ground. And so realize this is a very, very tough topic to approach, and that it really does take a team. The team being not just you, the team being not just your players, the team being food service, the team being other teachers, the team being the AD, the team being the school health professionals, and the team being the parent. So as a first step, you want to gain their trust. So what about the idea of parenthesizing each workout or each practice with energy breaks, so that those energy breaks become mandatory before and after, and garnering the support of parents, not just on a game day, but really throughout the week for practice, because we certainly know what happens on a game day is not necessarily going to translate to a win. What happens every day during practice, when each and every child is more likely to be involved in that sport, that's where we can make some inroads. And that levels the playing field, and it certainly brings everybody to the table. The idea of organizing breakfast to go bags is another option, and realizing now we've got hybrid models, we've got kids in school, we've got kids at home. So trying to be incredibly creative about this, or even thinking about competitions that might happen on a weekend when it might be an early morning one, the opportunity for breakfast to go bag. I love this idea of a lending locker. We have lending libraries that people are putting around their neighborhoods. So a lending locker where we can put non-perishable foods in there, no questions asked, and student athletes that are in need can help themselves to that food. Being careful of the words you use or the guidelines that you might give, however innocuously, however it might have worked for you personally, we want to make sure that the recipient on the other side of those words is not feeling ashamed or embarrassed as a result of what you say. And certainly encouraging parents and booster club involvement. Next slide, please. So when we think about some of those recommendations, and this is just things that we all might say. So, for instance, you might have a student athlete that says, "Coach, I need to put on some weight." Okay, you need to eat more frequent meals over the day. Well, what if there's not enough food in the house? How's that going to happen if that food isn't there? "Oh, coach, I want to put on some mass." Well, you should just go take a supplement. Supplements are pricey. Some of them are up to $40 for a container. That doesn't feed a family. That's just an addition that might be an unattainable addition for that individual. The recommendation to limit processed foods. There's a lot of nutrition that comes out of the middle of the grocery store. There's a lot of nutrition that comes out of what is in a bag, a box, a jar, and a can. So we want to make sure that we are not food shaming. The recommendation to only eat fresh produce. Well, we're all here in the Northwest, in the Northeast. Roberta is in Houston and it's still warm there. But for the rest of us, we don't have a wide variety of as much fresh produce right now because we're getting into the winter time, but it can also be costly and there may also be food waste. So the idea of applesauce, the idea of canned peaches, the idea of something frozen indeed might be more appealing and more attainable and affordable. The recommendation to avoid canned or boxed foods, no, because we can not only get a lot of nutrition in it, those foods can be safe. Those foods are hashtag enclosed, not exposed. So right now, when we're so concerned about keeping kids healthy, that is a really important recommendation. Making from scratch, you might want to do that. I do that sometimes. I don't do that all the time because I don't have the time. And in families right now where parents might be working more than one job to make ends meet, it's just not a recommendation that we should be giving. The only buy organic, nutritionally not better, cost-wise always more. So we know that we are not at all sacrificing anybody's nutrition if they choose not to buy organic. And then the idea of eat clean. To me right now, clean means hands washed, 20 seconds, soap and water is the most important thing that we tell people to do to eat clean. Anything other than that, no. Next slide, please. So thinking about this is this idea, and Roberta said this about the number of families that are receiving food assistance. We know that it's gone up dramatically with a lot of shortfall nutrients because people don't have enough food to eat. We know that not everybody is consuming enough produce. They can't find it. It's not affordable. They don't like it. I'm realizing that all forms of produce are fine to use, that our food choices have to be available, accessible, and affordable, and meeting people where they are. And I love this. This is actually from a resource called Recipes Eat Up. Clancy Harrison is a fabulous dietitian near Wilkes-Barre, and she runs a food pantry. And I helped her with this of getting experts from all over the US to put together some recipes based on the foods that are in the food boxes, because this is the other thing. Oftentimes the family might receive the food box and then what do they do with it? So realizing there's a lot of very, very beneficial, nutritious, shelf-stable items to find that hashtag wealth on the shelf with what it is they're getting out of the boxes. Next slide, please. So on that theme of the idea of wealth on the shelf, I use a lot of sound bites because that's the only way my athletes will listen to what it is I have to say. But we also want to think about culinary sufficiency or culinary ability. And so we've got a lot of kids who are tuned into their phones. They're always looking at a screen in some way, shape, or form. And so this is a perfect opportunity to be giving them some education and knowledge on how they can fuel themselves and making it fun with videos, with text, with blog posts, with recipes. Cooking demos work really, really well. And they can be very, very engaging. And they can also be very, very simple. I did a series of these at the onset of the pandemic. Actually, they were called Wealth on the Shelf. And I just looked through my shelf to see what I had and just started putting together some recipes. I think there's also opportunities to do things with videos from foods available from the dollar store because a lot of people are choosing to shop there. So we think about the equipment. We think about the knowledge that people have or don't have around their food. We think about the experience that people have had in the kitchen. And you know what? Cooking can be a physical activity. You lift that iron skillet a couple of times. That's just like being in the weight room, and it's a lot safer. And then the opportunity for budgeting is something that everybody could probably do a better job with, of figuring out how to balance their budget. Next slide. So this idea of picking wisely, how do we do both of these? Items that are low in cost, but also rich in terms of their nutritional profile. So I want to reiterate to you that food choices do not have to be elite. And we say this to our athletes. You do not have to have elite food choices in order to be able to compete. That's certainly wanting people to buy with what is in their salary cap. And that means items that are frozen, items that are fresh, items that are canned, and items that are dried. And that can be produce, but it may also be some other item. The other advantage of that is you have less waste, because it doesn't do the body any good if food is being thrown away. So one of the ones highlighted here is using evaporated and powdered milk. I've done a boxed mac and cheese using evaporated milk. It is beautifully creamy and delicious. I use powdered milk in energy bites so that I don't have to buy a high-priced protein supplement to do that, and it works really, really well. Taking powdered milk, mixing it with some cocoa, making our own cocoa mix can be something that's delicious, and that can go into an oatmeal. The idea of canned meats, be it a canned chicken, be it a canned fish in some way, shape, or form, sardines, mackerel, all those types of things. There's no waste, there's no throwaway. Beans are a terrific one, not only because of the nutritional value, but because of the low price point. Certainly the carbs, including rice, pasta, and oats, are not high cost items, and store brand cereals are as nutritious, as delicious as any of the name brand ones. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of putting all these things together as a composite of low cost and nutrient dense foods, starting with protein items. So we talked about the milk, eggs are another one. And again, no waste there with an egg, using canned meats, using beans, either canned or they can be from dry. They just require a longer prep time because they have to cook longer. Texturized vegetable protein is actually soy that has been defatted. So it's in a dry form. It does not have taste, but it can be mixed into a lot of different recipes. It takes on the flavor of anything that it's mixed with. Peanut butter is a great one. And how about peanut butter and evaporated milk, or excuse me, peanut butter and non-fat dry milk together? That makes a high protein peanut butter. Ground beef, another terrific option. Frozen shredded chicken, because that works really well for a barbecue chicken or stir fry, something along those lines. And it also takes less time because you don't have to prep anything. Frozen fish fillets and large containers of yogurt, which are a lot less costly than buying the individual ones. When it comes to produce, canned vegetables, canned fruit, potatoes are a terrific one. And again, no waste. Canned or frozen corn, since we're now out of fresh corn season. Bananas, apples, a little longer shelf life with those. Cabbage is a great one, doing tacos with shredded cabbage instead of lettuce, because that cabbage will last longer. Canned tomatoes, especially at this time of the year when the fresh one's not so great. Vegetable and bean soup, we can add tuna to that. We could add chicken to that. We could add grain to that and make that a complete meal, and certainly spaghetti sauce or salsa. And then in terms of the grains, oatmeal, we do a lot of overnight oatmeal. That's a great way to pair together the milk, yogurt, and even a canned fruit or pumpkin to make it kind of Thanksgiving-like. Store brand cereals, white or brown rice, various pastas. Barley is another one that has use aside from a beef barley soup. Just barley as a grain as a side is really very, very delicious and nutritious. Popcorn, tortillas can be used as wraps. Frozen pizza crust that we can put all types of things on top of, and even a pancake mix that we can fortify by adding peanut butter and adding some powdered mix, or making them with evaporated milk and adding some eggs. Next slide, please. So how do we score at the dollar store? Well, you know, the nice thing about the dollar store is there's a lot of food options that are available in terms of carbs, particularly grains. Protein items, and those tend to be more canned items, but they're there, or in the jar, like a peanut butter, or a bag, like a nuts. Produce is there. In some dollar stores, you will find fresh, and a lot of them you'll find items that are canned and perfectly acceptable and very high in nutritional value, and even some fats as well, primarily in the oils, the nut butters, and the nuts and the seeds. Next slide. So I wanted to give you a couple of very practical examples of this, of food items that we could make from the dollar store. So let's start with some breakfast. We could do a breakfast burrito. We could buy a package of whole grain tortillas. We could scramble an egg and put in there. An egg scramble really quickly in a microwave if people don't have a stove that works. We could use a little shredded cheese. We could use fresh tomato or salsa. We could put a little frozen spinach in there and have a banana on the side. Or we could do cereal with milk, having a slice of bread with some peanut butter on it, and then some canned peaches. Or something like oatmeal made with yogurt or milk or both, adding in a sliced or mashed banana, even a little sprinkled hot cocoa mix on there. It's kind of yum, a lot of yum in the bowl, and then some orange juice on the side. Next slide. Well, how about lunches? So we could do a packet or a can of tuna and some canned vegetables and add them to pasta, like a mac and cheese. That works really, really well. And we could even put some evaporated milk in there or powdered milk in there to bring the protein up a little bit more, and have an orange on the side. Or using canned beef cubes with frozen broccoli, carrots, some soy sauce, rice, and then fruit cocktail on the side. So kind of our beef and rice bowl, which will be a lot cheaper than getting it out. Or how about a chicken patty sandwich using a breaded chicken on a bun with some salsa, a little cheese, and then sides of canned green beans and applesauce. Next slide. And then what about dinner items from the dollar store? We could do chili, canned chili, or making the chili with ground beef and some beans, and even adding some black beans and corn and putting that on a baked potato for a complete meal. Mac and cheese with pureed white beans. I did this demo a couple of months ago, and it worked really, really well, using either a fluid milk or evaporated milk, adding a little Parmesan, that can be shelf stable, and then throwing in a can of mixed vegetables. One-stop shopping. And then a fish taco made with fish sticks, shredded cabbage, a little salsa, using our tortilla, and then a little pineapple on the side. Next slide. Well, what about fast food? You know, we know a lot of kids eat fast food. They like it. A lot of parents rely on fast food because they don't have to cook it. And the reality is there's a lot of nutritious choices available fast food that aren't high cost. So each one of these items are high in protein and they run under $3. A single cheeseburger and fruit yogurt parfait from McDonald's. The sausage egg McMuffin, also at McDonald's. Shredded chicken quesadillas from Taco Bell. Large chili from Wendy's. A roast beef and value shake from Arby's, and crispy chicken sandwich from Wendy's. So all of these items, not high in terms of the monetary cost, but higher in terms of the return on the investment with the protein. Next slide. And this, I'm just showing you, I've done this for some universities that I've gone to where we raffle them off, and I've taken various tote bags that I have, and again, looking at my shelf to see what's around and putting together like maybe 4 to 6 items in a bag with a recipe that's very simple. And for some of these that have cans, as you see there, I actually put in can openers as well, because not everybody has a can opener. So the idea of taking chicken and this one that I'm talking about is the top one on the right. It is using peas and carrots. It's using some canned chicken. I have some canned beans, mac and cheese, and evaporated milk. And there it is. It's kind of a high protein mac and cheese that does not take a lot of time or expertise to be able to make. These types of things can be fun. These types of things can be a great competition, because you know what? Your student athletes love competition. So the competition does not just happen in the weight room or on the field of play. It can happen at the table as well. And it's a great way to learn and have some fun at the same time, and it is still an activity. So I'm happy to share any of those recipes with anybody who would like to have them. Next slide, please. So as we start to wrap up, thinking about how we can help. The idea of a school-wide initiative, hashtag Feed the Need team. Everybody needs to be a part of that. Some cooking demos with food pantry staples, maybe with parents, maybe with the food service staff, maybe with grandparents as a way of doing that. Being the athletes advocates, and maybe enlisting some athletes who are willing to take this on to be the advocates for their teammates. Teaching about meal extenders. How do we use those? The TVP, the idea of using the beans in a recipe to bring more nutrition at a lower price point. Budget shopping, a tour of the dollar store. Again, there's a lot of options there that people are not aware of. We do need to talk about food safety concerns because that's critical, and also having that discussion about less waste. And again, that's why sometimes things that are canned can really be advantageous. Providing resources. Talking about the idea of do-it-yourself versus pricey supplements to buy. And I'll always use the example of energy bites, smoothies, shakes, all those types of things. We can make them very, very inexpensively. They taste great. And you know, it teaches the kids new skills as well. And then instead of care packages, share packages, because if we have more than what it is that we need, certainly we can share with those who might not have enough. And so at my last slide, wrapping up here, is when we think about the bottom line, we know that nurturing both our mind and body go hand in hand. That food insecurity has a deleterious impact on health, on body weight, on chronic disease risk, and on academic success. Good nutrition does not have to cost a lot of money, but there is some planning that is part of that. And that doesn't mean everybody preparing weekly menus, but there are some of those resources out there that are tremendously helpful. Students need help with cooking skills, with understanding the finances of food and easy recipes. So hashtag enabled table, hashtag food for all. Everybody, thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie and Roberta. For the end of the presentation here, we decided that we'd have our cameras on so that we can see each other and also address some of the questions that may have come up during the presentation. But first, I just really want to say, Roberta and Leslie, thank you so much for providing what really is a relevant and timely topic as we're amid this pandemic. There's people going through such trying times right now. Some for the first time around dealing with food insecurity, not knowing where to turn or how to deal with it. So thank you for providing such practical tips and tricks for these high school coaches to really help identify it with their student athletes. So I just wanted to say thank you first for that. And as we are addressing some of the questions that came in, please feel free to continue to type in the Q&A box. We'll try to address as many as we can for a few minutes. So one of the questions that came through was how, as a coach, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase here, but as a high school coach, how would you deal with a student or student athlete that may be a little bit overweight and is undernourished, dealing with food insecurity? How do you kind of deal with that, that type of student athlete? If they're overweight but undernourished, how do you address that?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great question, because I think it's underappreciated, because we think of someone being overweight that clearly they're getting enough to eat and they're getting enough calories, but not necessarily the quality. So in addressing that, this is where the redirection comes in. And so it may not always be using extra oil in some of the recipe tips that Leslie gave, cutting back on the oil, because clearly what fuels that athlete's body during practice is carbohydrate. They need protein to recover. So the discretionary calories is cooking a little bit lower in fat and helping, as Leslie said, with recipe demos and blogs, how to reduce the fat content, but keeping the nutrition up there. And then it's making sure that when you see things coming into your facility that have no nutritional value, so the bags of chips and the candy, then it becomes a great teaching opportunity to say, this doesn't really fuel us. And so we have our lending locker. If you need to go get something out of the lending locker, go help yourself from the lending locker. So I think there's ways of doing that. So just as Leslie said, we don't like food shaming, we certainly don't like weight shaming either,
Sure.
because you don't necessarily know what kind of resources your athletes are going to have when they go home.
Yeah, and I would add to that is we want to think about the fill factor, because that's important, and we don't want our kids to feel hungry. So when we're adding a little bit more vegetable in the context of something familiar, so the reason to add some extra vegetables to a mac and cheese or beans to a mac and cheese is you're not adding a lot of calories, but you're adding the protein, you're adding the fiber that helps kids to feel fuller, which is really going to help them more than making them feel bad about the weight that they have.
True. And I'll, just as a dietitian, I just want to add to that for that high school coach, just because someone is slightly overweight, they may be more nourished than that student that looks like they're at a good weight, and they may be fueling, with those empty calories. So, not nutrient dense food. So just beware of that and kind of look at it from all angles. Another question that came in was to the effect of, don't my student athletes need protein supplements? So I want to address that.
Well, student athletes need to have enough protein, and Roberta talked about this on one of the slides. But when we look at this, is when you have a protein supplement, the only thing that's in that protein supplement is the protein alone. That's it. When you do something that is a food, it's kind of the value added. What else is coming along for the ride? So if somebody says, I'm using a powdered milk, yes, I'm getting the protein, but I'm also getting the vitamins and the minerals that are there as well. And I'm doing that at a lower cost, which means that then I might be able to tag team something else with it to get the bigger bang for the buck. So absolutely, protein is important. Absolutely, we want it as part of every meal. But if we're paying such a high dollar amount for it, that then we shortchange on the other components of eating, the other macros, the micros, and the phytos, then we're not really doing the best for our bodies in growth, development, or performance.
Yeah, and I would add to that oftentimes if you ask student athletes what protein powder would they want to take, what you almost always hear is, I need to take whey protein, or maybe I need to take casein. And then when you ask the question, well, where does that come from in real food? No clue. They're going to think that they need to go to the health food store and buy it, and that's what's in milk. So the reason we keep using dry milk powder as an example is because it's a good source, as Leslie said, of B vitamins, minerals, all of that, but it's also a great source of whey and casein. So wouldn't you rather have a dry milk powder as a base for an energy bite with peanut butter and maybe some oatmeal. Now it's delicious and you're getting protein into your athlete, but they're not spending a disproportionate amount of their income. So as Leslie said, $40 a month is about what it costs. And when you think about what you could buy with $40 a month, or how much dry milk protein, dry milk powder you could buy, it's generally not a cost-effective strategy to buy a protein powder.
Yeah, something like the energy bites too. I mean, it takes a little bit of planning, not that much, but a little bit of planning. But you know, that recipe, you can freeze it. It can last a long time. Definitely get more bang for your buck that way. So great tip there. And then we'll take one more question, which comes up more often than not, is about inflammation in dairy, and some coaches thinking that dairy causes inflammation. Can you address that a little bit as well?
All right, I'll start. And it actually was just a meta-analysis. So looking at many studies addressing this issue and finding that indeed, no, dairy does not increase inflammation, number one. Number two, when we look at how we actually help to decrease inflammation, which sometimes comes with working out hard, it does, is that whey and the other branch chain amino acids, so whey is one of the proteins in milk, actually has a role to play decreasing inflammation. So total opposite of what it is that people believe to be true. So if we're really trying to not only decrease the inflammation, but maintain that level of muscle strength, muscle protein synthesis, optimal growth and development, excluding the dairy, if somebody doesn't need to. So assuming somebody's not allergic or having intolerance, and even there's option, is probably going to be more disadvantageous and have a deleterious effect on performance than including the dairy.
And I think I think that's a great observation, Leslie. The other thing I will always tell my high school athletes is there's a lot of do-overs in nutrition. One of the do-overs that you don't get is bone health. And so if you believe that, okay, I don't want inflammation, and I would agree, you don't want chronic inflammation, but then it's probably a good idea to look at your snacking habits and make sure that you're not eating cookies, candies, cakes, and pies, which are going to be more inflammatory. But if you exclude dairy during this window of bone development, you don't get a do-over. You just don't get a do-over. And so to me, again, that inflammation can be addressed in different ways. Leslie's great point that whey is actually the opposite of inflammatory, but we can't exclude bone health when we're talking about high schoolers. You just can't look at that and say, well, maybe I'll start drinking milk or eating yogurt when I'm in my 30s. I hate to tell you, the window is now. And you can be great advocates for your athletes to say, yeah, you know, that stuff about dairy has been out there for a while, factually not true, but did you know that it's really critical for bone health? And we really want to make sure that you have a college career if that's what you want, and you don't end up with some bone health issues secondary to not having adequate amounts of calcium.
That is an excellent answer from both of you. Thank you so much. I think you really cleared it up. And that is something that comes up, you know, sometimes frequently in presentations that we give. And so I think it's important, especially for this group as high school coaches, to hear it from two experts. So thank you for that. And I just want to say too, that this is a really tough topic for anybody to talk about, but I think for high school coaches, students trust you. Students confide in you in things that they won't with their parents, their teachers, their school counselors. And so I think as a high school coach, you guys really do play a critical role in being aware of the signs, listening to your student athletes, and addressing the issues if they come up, or even being proactive about it. So I really hope you found this presentation helpful today. And share it with your colleagues, any high school coaches that weren't on today and you feel like they would benefit from it, please feel free to share it. So thank you again, Roberta and Leslie. And I just want at this point to remind everyone that we did have 3 raffle prize winners selected today. And I just want to read off their names for you. Make sure I pronounce them correctly. The first one is Italian, so I should get it right. Brianne Corigliano, Alton Hicks, and Brett Smyers. So congratulations to the 3 of you. We will be in touch with you shortly after the webinar. You won the Refuel Chocolate Milk Portable Cooler and $300 to stock it with chocolate milk for your student athletes. So congratulations again. There are some post-webinar poll questions that just popped up on your screen. There are 5 of them, so please scroll down and answer those for us. This will help us to gauge what you learned today and also some future topics of interest for webinars. You'll also be receiving a post-webinar e-blast from us in the next couple of days, and it will have the slide deck from today. It will have an on-demand webinar link, as well as a handout with some resources that both Roberta and Leslie talked about today. So again, without further ado, I just want to say thank you so much, Roberta and Leslie, for your expertise. You guys are both 2 well-regarded sports nutrition experts in the field, and we are lucky and honored to have you present to this group today. I hope that this webinar gets shared with many other high school coaches, as it's an important topic now and through the winter and for years to come. So again, thank you for the attendees that participated and both of you. And we hope to see you all soon. Be safe, and thank you again.
And thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.